Well, welcome this evening to a Return to Common Sense, the book of Proverbs. Today we're in chapter 22. But before we get started, I want to make mention of the tragic event that happened earlier today with the killing of Charlie Kirk. This is what we posted on our website, on our Facebook. We mourn with Charlie's family and the entire body of Christ. And we know his spirit is with Jesus and find strength that even in this tragedy, God will have his way. As Pastor has said all year, this is the year God is focusing on children. Charlie was on the forefront, ministering truth to our children on college campuses throughout the nation. God will not allow Charlie's blood to be shed in vain, but will lead to a greater awakening and revival. We wrote that because we believe it, and that for God's purposes, he allowed President Trump to not be murdered, and yet he allowed this to happen. There's a difference between allowing and being in favor of, but we're living in a fallen world in which people make choices, and God chose not to put his sovereign hand in this place to save Charlie's life. And you only have to think biblically to understand that the Lord could have saved his own son, Jesus, but for a greater purpose, he allowed Jesus to be crucified. I believe that something greater is going to come out of Charlie's death. I believe that what man meant for evil, God is going to turn to good. And I believe that the awakening that has already started on college campuses and revival on college campuses, the number of campuses that Charlie Kirk visited, the impact he had on people's lives. Some people still kind of in the deciding process on colleges that he attended. This event is going to work as an accelerant in terms of what God is doing as we head into the 2026 and the 250th anniversary of our country. I believe the governor of Utah put it well when he said that what's under fire is the whole Republican democracy we have, the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are, number one, life. And that was violated today based on a person's not believing in the ideas and ideals of Charlie Kirk. Believe me, God is not going to allow that blood to be shed in vain. I believe it will be, in the future, we're going to see a greater awakening on college campuses, greater revival. Revivals have already broken out. And probably emerging from this is going to be some people that didn't believe what Charlie was talking about. But because of this event, I believe you're going to find some people that were scoffers actually become on the side of it. Actually, God will probably anoint and raise up some people that are willing to actually put their lives on the line for truth. And that's what this is all about. I was asked by someone in the first service today concerning the just the whole concept of what has happened on college campuses and in the world in general in the United States in terms of people not wanting discourse anymore. I think that's a direct attack against God, because it was God who said, "Come, let us reason together." People don't want to reason when they're on the idea or on the side of an idea that's flawed. They simply want to shout you out. They simply want to just to get rid of your voice. No discourse anymore. But that's changing, and there's a tide of people that want to return to what our founders envisioned, and I believe that God is in charge of all of this as it heads into 2026, the celebration for our 250th anniversary as a Republican democracy. All right, here we go with chapter 22. I want you to notice on your last page, you have a graph, not a graph, but you have a picture tonight, an illustration. And it looks like what's up there. Kind of, yeah, very good. Good job, Leo. And what it is if you'll notice there's 7 lines that go up from the center, 7 spokes. And you'll notice that they list the verses in order. And what you have there is the fact that I divided all the 29 verses into 7 parts, which will point to that center. In the center, where we have a line on the paper you have, and all the question marks around it, is what was the purpose, the singular purpose? What was God trying to get across in Proverbs 22? It's essential to understand that so you don't get lost in the verses. All these 7 lines work together. All the spokes point to that wheel. They make the circle complete. So when you're thinking about chapter 22, you need to understand that. All right, so here we go. It starts with this. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold. The rich and the poor have this in common. The Lord is maker of them all. A prudent man foresees evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. By humility and the fear of the Lord are riches and honor and life. Thorns and snares are in the way of the perverse. He who guards his soul will be far from them, referring to the thorns and the snares. Okay, so we want to take a look at these 5 verses because they're going to set the tone. And if you go to page 2, you're going to see what I wrote on it, and then we'll come back to it in just a minute. Referring to verse 1, a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold. On page 2 it says, a good name is something that is gained by being wise and showing compassionate concern for others. Priority in chapter 22 is placed on community. We live in a community that is watching how we live. Favor from God and man is what is said about Jesus. Luke 2:52 says, quote, and Jesus increased in wisdom. That's what we're all here for. That's why we're reading the book of Proverbs. Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. This should also be our goal. It is accomplished by how we live and interact with others. Jesus reminds us that, quote, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and yet loses his soul? How do we look upon those less fortunate than ourselves? Remember, Proverbs 14:31 states, he who oppresses the poor reproaches his maker. That refers directly to verse 3 where it says, or verse number 2, where it says, the rich and poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. Rich and poor, the Lord is the maker of them all. How do we look, going back to page 2, how do we look upon those less fortunate than ourselves? Remember, Proverbs 14:31 states, he who oppresses the poor reproaches his maker. But he who honors him, God, has mercy on the needy. And do we just think about it, or do we reach out to the less fortunate? Should have a question mark there. A prudent man wants to grow in favor with God and man and does not want to lose the respect of either. God expects those with more to show compassion to those with less. To ignore this will result in loss of favor. Being humble and walking in the fear of the Lord teaches us to remember that we live in community. Riches are not to be gained at the expense of our honor before God and man. Our life should be a testament to the relationship we have with God. God wants us to help the less fortunate. We do not want our path to be surrounded and covered by thorns and snares. We need to stay humble, especially if God rewards us with the means to help others. We need to guard against closing our hearts and eyes to others. Having read that, now let's go back to the very beginning of the first page and look at these first 5 verses. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold. So the origination of what is coming in chapter 22 is giving mankind a choice, and God trying to encourage us through Solomon to go in the right direction. The right direction is you will be much more successful if you put your focus on serving the Lord and having his favor upon you than spending your life searching for silver and gold, meaning trying to do it your way. Remember when Solomon came to God and asked for wisdom, God said, because you've asked for this and you haven't asked for riches and so forth, he said, I've added those on also. So it comes down to the illustration I give about the cart and the horse. Which is in front, the horse or the cart? Well, the horse is. The horse is our relationship with God, and then allow God to fill the cart with however he wants to bless us according to what he has planned for us in life. And so for us, a good name is what needs to be chosen. A good name with God and a good name with man, and that's exactly what Luke chapter 2 said of Jesus. He grew in stature, in favor with God and with man. That should be what motivates us. The next verse 2, the rich and the poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. You see, if you try to search after silver and gold, you're motivated for silver and gold, you might just do whatever it takes to get it. And it doesn't matter how many people you step on, how many people you misuse, how many people you lie about, what you do to get it, because you are singularly, your goal is on riches, silver and gold. And what will happen in that? You'll start looking down upon others. You'll want to separate yourself from others. Somebody comes to you and says, hey, you know what, I think somebody needs to take care of these. The response will probably be, they're in that because of their own self. I have no time for that. I've got to keep focused on what my goal is. What's my goal? Riches. And what happens is it divides the community. It moves a person outside because psychologically even, or morally, conscience-wise, they have to start not looking at what's happening around them. They have to keep focused on that goal of silver and gold. But here, the Lord reminds us that he's the maker of us all. We're all part of community. We have to have especially as Christians, we're supposed to what? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We're supposed to take care of those that are less fortunate. We're not supposed to judge everybody and say, they're all because of this. No, everybody's got their individual life. Everybody's got their individual journey. And there's different reasons why unfortunate things happen to people. And that's what God's pointing out here. But a prudent man foresees evil and hides himself. But the simple pass on and are punished. What is the evil that man foresees? It's the going after the riches instead of having right relationship with God. Okay? But the simple pass on and are punished. Why? Because as we'll see as we get into this more, that by neglecting God and his way, not only loses your favor with God, but because when you mistreat others, you'll lose favor with them. They won't be there for you when you come to your time of need. Thorns and snares are in the way of the perverse. He who guards his soul will be far from them. In other words, if I guard my soul, I want to do things God's way, I don't have to worry about the snares and the thorns because I'm in favor with God and I'm in favor with man because I'm treating them justly, even more so, mercifully. And because of that, God can use that on our benefit. So our favor comes from God. It also comes from those that we interact with. So we want to make sure that we're interacting well with people and not looking down on them, making judgments because of their socioeconomic conditions, their race, their, pick out whatever you would be tempted to have bigotry or arrogance towards. You don't want that in your life because you're working against God. So in that regard, now let me just read through what I wrote again. A good name is something that is gained by being wise and showing compassionate concern for others. Why? Because he's the maker of us all, the rich and the poor. Priority in chapter 22 is placed on community. We live in a community that is watching how we live, and so it's important how we respond to the needs around us. Favor from God and man is what is said about Jesus. Luke 2:52 says, quote, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man." That's our goal. This should also be our goal. It is accomplished by how we live and interact with others. Jesus reminds us that what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world yet loses his soul? How do we look upon those less fortunate than ourselves? Remember, Proverbs 14:31 states, "He who oppresses the poor reproaches his maker, but he who honors him, God, has mercy on the needy." And do we just think about it, or do we reach out to the less fortunate? A prudent man wants to grow in favor with God and man and does not want to lose the respect of either. God expects those with more to show compassion on those with less. To ignore this will result in loss of favor from both. Being humble and walking in the fear of the Lord teaches us to remember that we live in community. Riches are not to be gained at the expense of our honor before God and man. Our life should be a testament to the relationship we have with God. God wants us to help the less fortunate. We do not want our path to be surrounded and covered by thorns and snares. We're going to see that come up again in a minute. We need to stay humble, especially if God rewards us with the means to help others. We need to guard against closing our hearts and eyes to others. So here at Vista Christian Fellowship, we're involved with Franklin Graham in the Samaritan's Purse, or the Christmas child, what's it called? Operation Christmas Child. And so we do that every year. It would be easy just to ignore the fact that people that we're never going to see in our whole life, living in foreign lands, in dire and poverty situations, they just aren't in our normal view because we're out there. And if your viewpoint, if your goal, if your impetus is searching after things to build self, then what's going to happen is you're going to not even be concerned about that. Whereas when we watch a video with Operation Christmas Child and see a boy who's now a man who's working with Operation Christmas Child tell about how he was in an orphanage and he opened his box and it was a bar of soap, and it was the first bar of soap he ever owned in his life. And the impact that that little bar of soap made on him not only affected him, but affects upon all those that see it. The importance of caring for others. Now let's develop this even further in chapter 22 again, verses 6 through 9. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now, we've all used that verse from one time to another, and it certainly has a general meaning, but look at it within the context of where it's written. Train up a child in the way he should go. What way? The way he's just elaborated on caring about others, not just yourself. That's the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So if you see this verse in relationship to what he's just said, train up your child to care for others because God is the maker of the rich and the poor. And if you've been given means to help those that have less, then you need to do that because why? You find the favor of God and you'll also find favor in man. Because guess what? Nobody knows when some kind of trial will come to us. Remember the saying? That saved but for the grace of God, there go I. Meaning bad situations can happen to any of us, and we want to make sure we're right with God and man. Okay, so train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Notice which comes next. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. Now, why in the world is that in there? Because that's a statement about life. That is a statement about life. The rich rules over the poor. That's why you want to keep from indebtedness. Now, all of us have to deal with debt in some regard. Maybe you're buying a car on time or buying a house on time or just whatever it is that you owe somebody. Well, now that becomes real. The borrower is servant to the lender. Okay, that's just a reality. So you need to be aware of that because, again, he's speaking also to his son, the eventual king, in terms of what he's going to do with the wealth that he has. He who sows iniquity will reap sorrow. What kind of iniquity? Treating the poor badly, not reaching out to the poor, being arrogant, being a bigot, being a racist. All those things hurt to your own harm, whereas you're really doing it to separate yourself from others that are less fortunate. And the rod of his anger will fail. In other words, the person that's in it for himself and he's scoffing at others. We saw about the scoffer last week. He's scoffing off. I don't have anything to do with them. They wouldn't have their problems except they cause it themselves. And on. And he's anger. He speaks loud. And again, that's the difficulty we have in our country today. People don't want to have discourse. What they want to do is shout you down. Why? That's a definite sign that you have a very weak position. You have one that only works on emotion, but really fails with common sense. And so in the day that he needs the help, all of his anger is going to fail him. People are just going to walk away. He who has a generous eye will be blessed, for he gives of his bread to the poor. Do you see how God's developing this storyline? You see that right there, the last verse? He who has a generous eye will be blessed, for he gives of his bread to the poor. That's what this whole thing is about. It's about your attitude towards those that are less fortunate than you. And whether it's just a thought in your mind or whether there's actually action on your part towards those. It's in the first 5 verses, and it's right here in the next 3 verses. So what are we to train our children? We need to instill in them godly common sense, especially how the world works, about the lender and the borrower. So what are we to train our children? We need to instill in them godly common sense, especially how the world works. The world is set up that indebtedness can put and keep people in bondage. To avoid this, people may do unscrupulous things to attain wealth, but they will eventually reap sorrow. At that time, all their threats and anger will not save them. On the other hand, a generous person, walking humbly with God and helping the poor, will be blessed. That blessing can come from either the favor of God directly or the favor of those we have helped along life's way. Okay? Verses 10 through 12. Cast out the scoffer, and contention will leave. What's the scoffer? It relates directly to all of this. The scoffer is saying, I don't want anything to do with your Christianity. I don't want to have anything to do with morals and all. The chief aim of man is what? Do unto others before they do it to you. I want to build my empire. I want to have it all. And I don't want to hear anything about Christian morals. Cast out the scoffer, and contention will leave. Yes, strife and reproach will cease. Now check this out. He who loves purity of heart and has grace on his lips, the king will be his friend. What does it mean to have grace on your lips? Is that speaking positively about others or negatively? Positively. If you have grace, again, the saying, save but for the grace of God, there go I. I could be in that person's situation. If we have grace on our lips, if we have purity in heart towards God, notice what it says. The king will be his friend. Yeah. Which king? You can ask questions afterwards. Which king? Yeah, the king, the Lord, who gives favor, will be on your side if you have grace on your lips towards others. Okay? But then also, it's the earthly king too. Remember that the king represents here the highest position. In other words, if you are walking in the favor of the Lord, remember Joseph, if you're walking in the favor of the Lord, there are no limits to how God can move you into position in life. Remember Esther, just a common woman, but she will be used to save a nation. So if you're walking in purity of heart and grace is upon your lips, remember just last week or the week before, we dealt with Abigail and Nabal, who was a foolish man. And Abigail used prudence and wisdom, went to David, okay, and saved that whole family. Except for Nabal, who under judgment of God died 10 days later from a heart attack. All right, so let's go on here. And he who loves purity of heart and has grace on his lips, the king will be his friend. The eyes of the Lord preserve knowledge, but he overthrows the words of the faithless. Faithless towards what? Faithless towards him in relationship to his teachings, to what he tells us. He's trying to get a message to us. But the faithless, he says he overthrows the words of the faithless. It's not going to work for them. It's going to end up in disaster. Those who subscribe only to the wisdom of the world will scoff at the ways of God. Their motto is, do it unto others before they do it to you. God says to do away with that ungodly thinking and live humbly with your fellow men who are likewise created in his likeness. I'm now bringing it all up, all those verses together. Keep our hearts pure, looking at life through God's eyes and living according to his teaching. And there is no limit to how far or how high God can promote you. Always remember Psalm 75, 6 and 7. For promotion comes neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south. But God is the judge. He puts down one and exalts another. That's the favor of God. That's what we want to walk in. God's promises are always true. They don't change. Those who choose to ignore him are among the pack of the faithless. That last closing line. They're among the pack of the faithless. Their faulty understanding and lack of respect for God will lead to their demise. Verses 13 through 16. The lazy man says, there is a lion outside. I shall be slain in the streets. The mouth of an immoral woman is a deep pit. He who is abhorred by the Lord will fall there. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of correction will drive it far from him. He who oppresses the poor, here we go again. He's concluding it right here. He who oppresses the poor to increase his riches, and he who gives to the rich will surely come to poverty. 3 times in a row now, or 4 times, it's dealing with the same subject that God's speaking on. Now let's talk about this. The lazy man says, there is lion outside. I shall be slain in the streets. The lazy man, going now over to page 7, the lazy man, when confronted with the danger, simply gives in to his impending doom instead of attempting to survive. Think about that for a second. W.C. Fields used to say, whenever I have the urge to work, I lie down till the urge passes. Now, when we're talking about the lazy man who cites the danger but doesn't remove himself from it, reminds me of what Jesus said in the parable in Luke 16, 1 through 8. He also, Jesus, said to his disciples, there was a certain man, rich man, who had a steward, and an accusation was brought to him, and that this man was wasting his goods. So he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward. Then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me. I cannot dig. I am ashamed to beg. I have resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they, speaking to the people he has relationship with, may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of his master's debtors to him and said to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. So he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? So he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly, that's prudently, for the sons of this world are more shrewd or prudent in their generation than the sons of light. So what's Jesus doing here? He's giving an accolade to a person that's cheating. but you're missing the point that he's making here. The point he's making is he's been talking to the Pharisees and Sadducees, giving them truth. They're seeing miracles, but in the front of all that truth and all the miracles, they're not moving a budge. They're just going to kill him. They don't want to have anything to do with change. That's why Jesus says that the sons of this world are more shrewd than the generation of the sons of light. Okay? So what he's making an instance here is he's saying to us, he's saying that if you see impending doom, get up and do something about it. Don't be lazy. Okay? As a matter of fact, let's go right back to that line and see again what it says. The lazy man, when confronted with danger, simply gives in to this impending doom. Let me read it from here. The actual scripture. The lazy man says, there is a lion outside. I shall be slain in the streets. So he's lazy. He recognizes the danger, but doesn't do anything about it. Then Solomon gives a second example. The mouth of an innocent woman is a deep pit. He who is abhorred by the Lord will fall there. So what's he saying? Likewise, the foolish man who falls for the immoral woman's advances will not be spared by God from his folly. Like a child who needs to experience correction, that's the next verses. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of correction will drive it far from him. Like a child who needs to experience correction, the individual who ignores God's clear warning concerning reproaching the less fortunate will suffer correction. Okay, so what he's saying there is that a person, not the lazy person, but the person who's being seduced by the immoral woman, if he follows that, the Lord's not going to have mercy on him. He's going to allow him to fall there. And so what is he actually saying in this context with both the lazy man and the man that's given in the immoral woman? That if you are not receiving my truth, if you're not taking care of the less fortunate, then you're either the lazy person who sees it but doesn't want to have anything to do with it, you're the scoffer, or you're a person that your own desires are taking you over. You're willing to follow your own desires in that immorality, then do it God's way, to obey God. And the results will be catastrophe. Then finally, in the last of those verses, if I can go to this other page here. Let's see if I have that. To be verse, or here we go. Oh, I can't find it. But I want to refer to it as because of the part that says about the rich. Okay, well, let me just read on, and it refers to the phrase anyway. The phrase, quote, he who gives to the rich, refers to trying to gain access to the rich by helping them oppress the poor. In other words, if you try to snuggle up with the rich and say, because he's rich, hey, the rich guy says to you, hey, you know what, these people over here owe me money, they're not paying me, would you kick them out? And the guy goes, okay, he does that. But see, they're both going to end up in poverty as it relates to the Lord. The Lord's not going to condone that. The key is not how much we have, but what we do with it. Remember Proverbs 19:17. He who has pity on the poor lends to the Lord, and he will pay back what he has given. See, the Proverbs, Deuteronomy, all of the teachings of God are God is maker of all. Some are rich, some are poor. You should have compassion for everybody. Don't view people in a homogeneous sense where everybody is the same way. No, everybody's got their individual life. You need to have compassion on those that need compassion on them. Then verses 17 through 23. Incline your ear and hear. Now here's a summation. Now, you've heard everything that we've discussed going into this, okay? Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply your heart to my knowledge. For it is a pleasant thing if you keep them within you. Let them all be fixed upon your lips, so that your trust may be in the Lord. I have instructed you today, even you. Have I not written to you excellent things of counsels and knowledge, that I may make you know the certainty of the words of truth, that you may answer words of truth to those who send to you? Do not rob the poor, because he is poor, nor oppress the afflicted at the gates. For the Lord will plead their cause and plunder the soul of those who plunder them. Boom! Checkmate. End of debate. In other words, he's summing up. Haven't I taught you things in these first verses? And what are the things that he's trying to get across? Do not rob the poor, because he is poor, nor oppress the afflicted at the gate. For the Lord will plead their cause and plunder the soul of those who plunder them. So right now, before we finish on the verses, when you look at the chart I gave you and said that all the scriptures are pointing to something in the center, which is the whole purpose of Proverbs 22, what should be written on that line? What is the thing that all these are pointing to? Your heart and actions towards those less fortunate than you. Your heart towards the poor. Your heart towards those that are less fortunate. And not your heart in a way that it doesn't include actions. God demands of us that we realize that everyone is created in the image and likeness of God, and we should care for those around us. That's why we do Samaritan's Purse. It would be easy not to have a program like that, but we have a program. It would be easy for people to just say, I don't have time for that. Not understanding that the favor of God looks upon us when we are taking care of those who are less fortunate than us. So whether it's Operation Christmas Child, for years, our family has been supporting monthly Christian Broadcasting Network, bringing water into the countries that need water. Okay, I was in probably less than a year ago. I was in I think it was a department store of sorts. I can't remember what kind of store it was. But at the end, I signed, I put in my credit card for what I purchased. And at the end, it said, would you like to make a donation to St. Jude's Hospital? And I went, whoa, I would like to make a donation to St. Jude's. And I've never seen that anywhere else. So boom, I put in a donation to them. In other words, when your heart is moved, when you talk with somebody and you see that they're legitimately in need, this is not that you're not supposed to use prudence and discretion. Because if you go by the same off-ramp and the same person's there day in, day out, and you better investigate that a little bit further. Because it may be that person isn't really in need, because as you probably have read stories about people who make a healthy living off of pretending that they're in need, when in reality, in that individual's case, it's because they just would rather do that than work. So you have to be able to discern those things. And so, again, but the bottom line is God wants us to have compassion on the poor, less fortunate, and that's what goes on that line. All of these spokes in that circle go towards a center thing. And he keeps repeating himself to that very last one where he says, well, let me just read it one more time because I think it's important. Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply your heart to my knowledge. For it is a pleasant thing if you keep them within you, and let them all be fixed upon your lips, lips of grace, we already saw that, so that your trust may be in the Lord. I have instructed you today, even you. Have I not written to you excellent things of counsels and knowledge, that I may make you know the certainty of the words of truth, that you may answer words of truth to those who send to you? And then he gets you the conclusion. Do not rob the poor because he is poor, nor oppress the afflicted at the gate. for the Lord will plead their cause and plunder the soul of those who plunder them. That is walking out of the favor of God. You don't want the favor of God? Then just have no compassion in your heart towards those who are less fortunate. If you want the favor of God, understand what he's saying there, because we're all created by him. God summarizes what he's been saying throughout this chapter. God's bottom line is, do not rob the poor because he is poor, nor oppress the afflicted at the gate. For the Lord will plead their cause and plunder the soul of those who plunder them. Verses 24 through 27. Make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man do not go. In other words, he's talking again about the scoffer who wants nothing to do with God's way, but he's in pursuit of what? The opposite of the favor of the Lord. He's going for the gold and the silver, and no one's going to stand in his way. And if anybody attempts to, guess what? He's going to just be angry and furious. Again, like so much in our culture today, that people don't want to come and reason on issues to find truth. They simply want to speak over you, shout you down, because they're so weak in their position. And we've discussed that in detail over the last weeks. Make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man do not go, lest you learn his ways and set a snare for your soul. We saw that earlier, the snare. Here it is. The snare for your soul is learning the ways of the person that's in opposition to God, and more specifically, how we are to treat others. Do not be one of those who shakes hands in a pledge, one of those who is a surety for debts, if you have nothing with which to pay. Why should he take away your bed from under you? In other words, what he's saying there is that he wants true action. Remember, there's several stories in the Bible of hasty individuals who say something, but they have nothing to back it up. It's kind of like when Jesus says, which of these two did the will of the Father? One said, I'm not going. The other said, I'll go. But the one that said, I'm not going, comes to his senses later and goes. But the guy that says, I'll go, never went at all. Okay? So God doesn't want us to be lazy. He doesn't want us to be led by our own emotions. And he doesn't want us to be hasty. He wants us, because if he can get us out of being hasty and develop prudence and discretion, we will be thoughtful towards the needs of others. If we stay hasty, we will not. Angry and furious men are an example of the opposite of prudence. They are hasty and are apt to ignore God's clear commands. They are governed by impulse. Do not learn their ways. You are setting a snare for your own life. Again, the hasty person enters themselves into the obligations of others, even though they don't have the resources to fulfill their promise. If he fails to repay, they will take away all that he has. Finally, verses 28 and 29. Do not remove the ancient landmark. Now, that's one of my favorite verses. We use that a lot, especially in regard to the American Revolution and what our founders said in terms of how God showed up at critical times in the history of our country, which gave them confidence and boldness to put their lives on the line. But what do you think the ancient landmark is here? Do not remove the ancient landmark. Well, let me give it to you right from Deuteronomy. I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live. So God is telling us over and over again that we should care for the poor, that we should concern about the less fortunate, that he looks on that to give either favor or to remove favor. And that favor, when we don't have it from God, we're not going to get it from man either, because we're mistreating them. So when he says, do not remove the ancient landmark which your fathers have set, it's speaking in the context of here about how we treat others. Do you see a man who excels in his work? What work? Obeying God. If you excel in obeying God, being obedient to God, he will stand before kings. Which king? King Jesus? What is Jesus going to say at the end? Come, welcome, my good and faithful servant. Okay? In other words, do you see a man who excels in his work? He will stand before kings. King Jesus, but also kings down here. Again, Joseph. He will not stand before unknown men. In other words, God will promote people that are walking faithfully before him. Do not remove the ancient landmarks which your fathers have set. Do you see a man who excels in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before unknown men. The fathers set the way through their own experiences with God. The ancient landmark is doing it God's way. God said to them, I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live. When we have God's heart, especially towards the less fortunate, we excel in God's eyes, and there are no limits to the far-reaching effects of our lives on others. All right, well, that is chapter 22. Before we have open discussion here, we're going to let you all go, and we will hopefully see you next week. Proverbs chapter 23 on the way to Proverbs chapter 31. All right, God bless you all.